Good evening. The topic I wanted to talk about today is space, public-private partnerships, and institutional Germany. It's a wide topic. It's a, I think, very complicated topic. And to be honest, it's for me more an experiment. It's a search, not just research. Marx said something like, ultimately, all economy is a matter of economy of time. And he said society must allocate its time appropriately to achieve a production corresponding to its total needs, just as the individual has to do the same. Now, what I want to do, and I would say I dare to do, is to say, taking this quote, perhaps we can add and say all society is about social interaction in different ways in the broadest sense, and it is located in space. So we have time to economy, and we have space to the social. Some form of space, it's not determined. And exactly the way how we determine and what we put into it is what I'm interested in. It's not necessarily physical space, it can be as well, let's say, for instance, digital spaces. And another quote from Marx in this context, where he talks about the economy and says, Monsieur Proudhon, the economist, understands very well that men make clothes, make linen or silk materials in definite relations of production. But what he has not understood is that these definite social relations are just as much produced by men as linen, flax, etc. Social relations are closely bound up with productive forces. In acquiring new productive forces, men change their mode of production, and in changing their mode of production, in changing the way of earning their living, they're changing all their social relations. This is a very important point that should concern us more. And summing up so far, we arrive at a triangle. It's the distribution of time, it is social space, and it is relational hierarchies. Looking at these three dimensions, we can try from there to define what we are actually talking about when it comes to the specification of all social relationships. Now, social science, if we take it in a broad sense, I don't want to engage in detail in these questions, but social science is today it's a hugely developed and differentiated system of specialization, and more important, I think, is that it is as well, with this division of labor and the specialization, resulting in a huge fragmentation. Fragmentation from which it claims its own meaning and thus develops further. So we are dealing with different fragments. We are not dealing with the totality of science. Applying this to the given issue of the exploration of social spatial issues, we find especially two strands. Am I right? No, it's more. we find, first and foremost, specialized studies. Specialized studies from architects on social space, from the economists on distribution of space, and so on and so forth. The occupation of space by different groups, which is, of course, as well not only a social issue, but as well a regional planning issue. And then we find interdisciplinary research, mainly employed with something that we can say it's an utilitarian perspective. Most obvious, especially today, we have three important strands. We have digital instruments to measure things, to measure behavior within space. We have customer behavior in relation to the position of commodities and goods. How do they behave if something is positioned here and not here, the height and so on and so forth. And then we have the meaning. We can calculate from there the meaning, where should be something located to increase the purchases. Now the problem is that we always start, in the two cases I mentioned, in this way, coming to the third point, we always start from something that we know. And in a way, we cannot go in a different way. It's something real, really known, or it is a presumed truth. And the question is, can we methodologically go beyond this? Meaning looking at space, looking at the utilization, use of space in a certain context, and then say, well, but it could be completely different. Of course, we can say in general terms it could be completely different, but what would it mean in more concrete terms? Can we say, or can we predict, can we understand, presume a fundamental change of these productive forces? And this is actually something we are today witnessing. So I don't want to propose, I don't want to question the principle of validity of the basic superstructure that it is, for me, a fact that the economy is in last instance the determining factor of the entire structure and the processes of the social fabric. And the question is, the challenge is, to translate this methodologically, this general methodological processual relational perspective into an operational method. So, mind, it's a methodological, processual relational perspective. It's permanently in move. It's a process, never-ending story, if you want, shifting not just relations, but the entire structure of how things are related. And in this sense, in this context, space will play a role. Now, there is a general issue which translates to here at UL, somebody always coming up with this question. It's a very simple question, but it doesn't simplify anything what to do. This question is not simplifying things, and it does not lose its heavy weight, because it is so difficult, if not impossible to answer, by this kind of, I find a solution, I find a concrete way. Now, there may be different perspectives and different stances made, and for my part, I still go and elaborate this with an elaborated understanding of the regulationist school and the social quality approach. The regulationalist perspective, the regulationist perspective is trying to integrate accumulation regime, the mode of regulation, the living regime, and the mode of life. So the last, there is this distinction which we have to keep in mind. And this is the ontological point of reference that we have to then apply furthermore the social quality approach, the perspective that has these dimensions of biographical development and societal development, and the institutions and communities, on the other hand, as an epistemological frame of reference. So, if we think about this, then we have two frameworks or two pillars, strong pillars, that allow us to analyze now. I take it here from Isaiah Berlin, that men in some sense make their own history. Marx said the same, it's a widespread assumption, and what Berlin said is men understand it as they do not understand the world of external nature, which since it is not made but only observed and interpreted by them, it's not intelligible to them as their own experience and activity can be. So it is understanding of something by way of saying this is something we can actually handle. It is something we can control. And I want to link this a little bit, extend this to some analysis of Braverman. Braverman analyzing management, scientific management and Taylorism, and stating it thus becomes essential for the capitalist that control over the labor process pass from the hands of the worker into his own. So this physical aspect, the mechanical control, the tangible part is actually emptied by way of not allowing anymore to have content, to be controlled. It's only controlled by the worker now in mechanical terms, and this transition of control presents itself in history as a progressive alienation of the process of production from the worker. To the capitalist, it presents itself as the problem of management. So we have these two different perspectives, and it is important to recognize the role of control. It's the separation of craft knowledge and craft skill. We have this today, again, the knowledge society, although in many cases we are not talking about knowledge, we are talking there about skills. A huge difference which is not sufficiently recognized. Personally, I came up actually in my PhD thesis, in my dissertation, that is going now to be reprinted. I talk about two different ways of utilizing, of appropriating something. The one is the appropriation in technical terms. I really have something under control. And the other is simply not having something in control, but owning it. The property right that is decisive without that I'm actually able to control something. I can own a car, but I'm not necessarily able to drive it. So the question, the tension is, who is really appropriating this car? I think from here we can think more clearly about the hegemonic patterns that are developing as well when it comes to the definition of space. It may sound like an excursus. It is not. It's coming to the core, but it's a different step now. Looking at life, life is increasingly a kind of patchwork-based being. We have different roles, we have different existences, apparently. And this is the case for the social, for society, and as well for individuals. We are not playing roles, but we are living in different situations, in different roles, in different existences. And importantly, it is not a matter of arbitrariness. It's not arbitrary that we have different roles and which we have, but this is something that is systematically developed, even if it seems to us sometimes that it is completely arbitrary. Now I come to this issue of space. I say space, as a thesis, space, and it is about designing and shaping space. That means to provide a combination of spatial frames that can accommodate these patches. So it is something we all have to buy something. We all have to socialize in different ways, in ways or by way of exhibiting our social personality, being sportive, energetic, being very conservative, whatsoever. We exhibit our existence, our identity, and it is as well something we all have to entertain ourselves, and we need to be entertained, and we have to politicize and educate ourselves in community, together with others. We all have to do it. We all have to do it in different ways, and we all have to do this in some form of space. And here we find this pattern of establishing hegemony by way of fragmentation, having different spaces for different parts of these patchworks. But at the same time, we have this combination, they are sticking together. It is, or we can go back with this to the question of fragmented existences, the fragmentation here in terms of hegemonic patterns, where we have craft knowledge and where we have craft skills. We are put into boxes, we are put into fragments, spatial fragments, where we just function. And this function is great fun. It's not really a passive existence, but it is, even as craft skill, it is something where we live up to standards. And in this way, we can see space as well in a wider sense, small spaces, large spaces, as a kind of soft precrustion bed that functions as defining models of socialization. It is within this framework we socialize, but it is at the same time, as such, the foundation and the framework for life regimes and the mode of living, and vice versa. By stepping into this bed, we are changing it. And it is, if we want, a kind of life world that is reflecting very much the productive forces I had been mentioning in the beginning with quoting Marx. Social relationships are closely bound up with productive forces. And social relationships in this way here, life worlds, are as well bound up with space and spaces. It's never only one space, there are different ones. Now, coming back to this question, what to do? There are 3 points, at least, I want to make that makes it difficult to apply this framework which I try to present, or which I presented, and which I think is useful for us. There is the general difficulty of this regulationist approach of accepting the history, the subject of history, men making history. This is not acceptable for everybody. And specifically when it comes to question of political economy, this is a very specific approach which cannot be easily, without hesitation, be applied in psychology, in pedagogics, in other areas, from other perspectives, in architecture. So there may be difficulties, there may be a resistance coming from that side. And the third point is what we see here is a very general framework, and of course it would be qualified by historical circumstances, by national, by regional differences and specificities. Still, what I propose to do as a matter of further research is coming from something very pragmatic. Arriving here in Łódź, there had been some things that immediately sprang to my mind. The usual outlay, the people's perception of public spaces is apparently something different. Still today, somewhat different between what we may call the East and the West. There are other areas, the Far East, China, Taiwan, Japan. There is difference again, as well difference to what we see here in Łódź, or in Moldova, or in other places. And another area would be what, according to my experience personally, Cuba, Havana. A different understanding of what public, of what space is, and how we live in space. And what sprang to my mind is, of course, here in Łódź, the reuse, the use of former industrial sites. Although doing a little bit research, the major project here, the Manufactura, with the international capital behind it and interwoven, is a relatively late project. The Manufactura in Łódź had been in 2003, 2006 started, whereas in Poznan we find the Stary Browar, an old brewery, which had been reused, and it commenced actually in 2002 and 2003, and still it is a long history that we have actually the Lingotto in Torino, the old Fiat company, where the industrial or industry conversion commenced in 1983, continued then up to 2003. This caught my initial interest, and I was looking then, for instance, at Torino, at Poznan. But it is something as well, when I talk to people, I saw it is an issue where interest is, and where it is not just the interest, a general interest, but it is this astonishment of what is going on, not only with these sites, not only with this public space, but in terms of wider understanding, wider differentiation of public spaces, of the understanding of private-public relationships. It is in this way, this condensation of multiple relations that are or that can be found in a place like Manufactura. It's not clear. I checked it. There are different statements. It's full of contradictions, which makes it even more interesting. Now, we have, of course, this space. We have the shopping center, a shopping mall. But if we go on and question it, it is much, much more. What is involved in this question, then widening question of social spaces, public spaces, goes on to architecture, of course, to economic question, to social divisions, but even issues of but basically everything, sports, climbing walls, ballroom dance, arts, including in parts l'art pour l'art, l'art de vivre. This is where we live and how we live and how we make use of space. Something where we take it for granted. We are going there every day or every week or whatsoever, and we are just not recognizing the changes, the historical changes that are taking place, not least in terms of l'art pour l'art, art de vivre. An entirely new way of living, of appropriating space amongst ourselves, dividing space. Then we have, of course, now, and this is a little bit my problem, we have, of course, the standard analysis. Division of markets, high street and not. This always plays a role. We have architectural issues. But what I'm interested in, and I hope we can get started working on this, is what does it mean in terms of reshaping our self-understanding of capitalism today? What capitalism today means and how it is shaped and how it's developing, and including as well how it is developing by way of our identity and our way of understanding meaning, understanding work. So my proposal is in very concrete and practical terms, just skip disciplines and let's try to approach these things not from our given knowledge, not from what we assume. This is something we can take for granted. Different disciplines, legal, law, jurisprudence, economics, sociology, and. But let's try to look at this from a different perspective. Let's try to look as economists at the question, what does it mean, this new way of shaping space, for instance, for public health? What does it mean in terms of law? And I would like to have a sociologist, for instance, looking into this. What does it mean in terms of law? On the one hand, the meaning of private law for all our existing within society. Is everything now regulated by law, or do we have free, apparently at least free legal spaces? And what does it mean for citizenship? Are we still thinking about in a traditional way about citizens? Or has this now a new meaning? I think this is an exciting possible perspective for research, that we overcome not only our borders, but that we overcome the traditional understanding that would suggest, okay, let's think about space, public spaces, just in a linear way, how they are developing and how it is going on in a kind of business as usual. I think business as usual today may be, if we try to do so, may be quite unusual. And this is something here proposed. Research should be the same. Thank you.
De la fin du passé, faisons table rase, fous l'esclave debout, debout. Le monde va changer de base, nous ne sommes rien, soyons tous. C'est la lutte finale, groupons-nous, et demain, l'international sera le genre humain. Il n'est pas de sauveur suprême, ni Dieu, ni César, ni tribun. Travailleurs, sauvons-nous nous-mêmes, décrétons le salut commun. Pour que le voleur rende gorge, pour tirer l'esprit du cachot. Soufflons nous-mêmes notre forge, battons le fer quand il est chaud. C'est la lutte finale, groupons-nous, et demain, l'international sera le genre humain. Ces paroles qui trottent dans la tête des opprimés du monde entier sont celles d'un de nos poètes qui s'appelait Eugène Potier. Aujourd'hui, le monde a changé. Est-ce qu'il y a moins d'exploités, de chômeurs, d'enfants affamés, pour qu'on puisse se reposer, de chanter, de chanter, de chanter, de chanter. C'est la lutte finale, groupons-nous, et demain, l'international sera le genre humain.